You're listening to Engaging Early Learners. I'm Rachel Glassman, special education teacher and resource creator. This podcast is your go-to for classroom strategies and teaching support that you can actually use. Whether you're on your way to work or heading home, I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode. Today we are going to be talking about teacher interviews and demo lessons, and I am so excited to get into this. I obviously have my own experience being interviewed and having to do demo lessons, and I also have the unique perspective of being on the other side of the table. When I was going back to school for my teacher leadership master's and for my principal certification, my supervisor certification, my principal at my very first school let me be a part of many interviews, Zoom and in person, many demo lessons, Zoom and in person. So I have had a very unique perspective where I have been on both sides of that situation. So I figured that it would be great coming off of last week when I talked about my story and how I have been through many different schools, many different experiences as a teacher, to kind of go into, obviously, how do we get into those different positions? We have to interview and sometimes demo lesson. So I have a lot of tips and tricks for you guys. I have a lot of advice. So this might be another long one, but I'm excited to get into it with you. I'm going to talk about how to prepare for these things, how to stand out, what I believe principals are really looking for. Again, this is just from my perspective and from interviewing alongside a couple of different principals. Actually, when we used to do interviews in my old district, we would sometimes have multiple principals there, and I got to be part of that panel and see how other principals also interact and how they ask questions. So I'm bringing that perspective as well. And then also the questions that you definitely should be ready for before walking into that interview in case you are asked them. If you are a student teacher right now and graduating soon, looking for your first teaching job, this episode is for you. If you are looking into switching districts, this episode is for you. Honestly, if you're just updating your interview skills and want to hear the perspective that I have, then this episode is also for you. After being in the classroom for many years, you might eventually down the line want to switch it up or switch districts like I talked about in the last episode. So this episode is definitely good to have on the list of episodes so you can always refer back to it. So I know interviews can definitely be overwhelming, intimidating. I truly think interviews are one of the most nerve-wracking parts of getting a teaching job because you can be an amazing, amazing teacher and still struggle to talk about yourself under pressure or about how amazing you are under pressure. You don't want to sound too self-centered. You don't want to sound obnoxious. So you try to, tone that down a little bit, but then you don't want to, downplay yourself and you want to share your strengths. So it's just such a balance. And it's just very, very hard to talk about ourselves sometimes. It's also hard to just talk in an interview about your experiences in general, or when you're asked questions, things but it's so hard when you're under pressure to answer those questions. And the crazy thing is, schools are not just interviewing to see if we know how to teach. That's what I learned through being a part of these interviews. They are trying to figure out, would the families trust you? Would the kids be able to trust you as not only their teacher, but we play a lot of different roles as teachers. So would the kids and everyone be able to trust you? How do you handle stress? Are you a flexible thinker? Can you be coachable? Are you willing to learn and willing to take other people's ideas? Are you willing to compromise? Will you fit into the school culture? Do you genuinely care about the kids? So there's a lot of other things that I believe schools, principals, admin are looking for when they interview you, not just, are you a good teacher? So today, I want to help you walk into interviews feeling more confident, more prepared, and honestly, just more relaxed, because I believe, truthfully, the more relaxed you are in an interview, the better off you will be, and the better off you will come off while you're answering all of these questions. Everything I'm sharing comes from my own experiences, like I said, interviewing, helping conduct interviews at my previous schools, And from a blog post that I put together after years and years of doing that, I have it on my website, engagingearlylearners.com. A lot of what I'm talking about today is pulled from that, so you can always go refer to that as well. Let's dive in. So, part one of this episode, we are going to talk about the biggest interview mistake that I believe teachers make. I want to start with this, the biggest mistake that I believe teachers make and that I probably made when I was 22 interviewing for my first job. Honestly, it's trying to sound perfect. People go into interviews, all different types of interviews, thinking that they need to sound like a textbook. They rehearse these robotic answers and they try to say all the right things instead of sounding like an actual human being that cannot answer right away and that needs a second to think. But principals are interviewing person after person after person, and eventually all of the answers just start to sound the same, especially those, robotic ones that people think they should be answering. The candidates that stand out are usually the ones who sound genuine, reflective, calm, and of course, student-centered. You do not need to pretend that you have everything figured out going into an interview, especially if you're a newer teacher. Administrators know that first-year teachers are still learning. What they care about more is, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to be reflective and flexible? Can you accept feedback? Do you care about kids? Can you problem solve? Can you be a team player? Those things matter more in an interview than trying to sound perfect and like you know everything already, because you shouldn't. Really, no one should. So if you take nothing else from this episode, remember this. You do not need to be the perfect teacher or the perfect interview candidate. You need to sound like someone they would trust with their students. All right, let's get into the next part of this episode. Before the interview even starts, there's things to do. Let's talk about preparation, because preparation is honestly what creates confidence, right? If we feel prepared, we feel less anxious, less worried, and we present as more zen and calm in the interview. So one of the biggest tips that I've come out of interviewing with is practice. Practice, practice, practice. And I know that that sounds obvious, but most people do not practice out loud. They think through their answers in their head and they assume that that's enough. Like, I don't need to practice. I don't need to talk out loud. I don't need to practice with someone, but that's not enough. You need to hear yourself answering questions, because there's a huge difference between, oh yeah, I know what I would say, and actually saying it confidently in the moment and knowing how to change up your answer a little bit in case the question is asked a little bit differently. You don't want to be so robotic and rehearsed that if a question is asked just a tiny bit differently than one that you practiced for, you have no idea what to say. So have a friend, a family member ask you the questions, record yourself, voice memo yourself, video yourself. Look back at those videos, practice in your mirror, time yourself. And the more you practice, the less likely you are to panic during the interview. And another huge tip, research the school beforehand. Please do not walk into an interview knowing nothing about the district. Please, please, please. Because again, going back to the fact that there are so many other things admin care about than just the fact that you're a good teacher. They care that you're going to be a part of their community, not just their school, the district as a whole. So know some things. Look up their mission statement, programs they offer, school demographics, any initiatives that they focus on, their social media pages, their website. Because one of the most common questions is, why do you want to work here? And you could come up with just some, generic answer, but imagine if your answer was something so specific to their place of work and where they dedicate all of their time and energy. Imagine how special that would be. If your answer is just, well, I applied everywhere, that's not really going to help you. You want to show that you understand the school culture and that you actually want to be there. Even saying something simple like, I noticed your school emphasizes social emotional learning and building community, and that's something I really value in my classroom as well. Here's how. Blah, blah, blah. That would go such a long way. Now, Let's talk about how to actually answer questions. This is definitely one of the hardest things, of course. It is the hardest part of an interview. One of the biggest things I mentioned in my blog post about all of this is always bring your answers back to your students. I learned this from my very first principal doing interviews with him. Always bring your questions back to the kids. Even if the question seems like more logistical or more academic. Here's an example question. What would you do if your lesson was interrupted by a delayed opening? Now, this was an actual question. It was a question that my principal used to ask in some way or another. A lot of people immediately just jump into the standards or the lesson pacing, and they're so logistical about it. But a really strong answer that also mentions the kids is this. First, I'd make sure my students were settled emotionally and had what they needed before jumping into instruction. Then I would prioritize the most important parts of my lesson and adjust based on timing. Now, this answer shows flexibility. You can be flexible as a teacher, as a thinker. You have empathy because a delayed opening could throw the kids off. And it's student-centered. And admins love that. Just like we do as teachers, right? Those kids come first. So don't think just because you're in this formal interview wearing your nicest outfit that you'll probably ever wear as a teacher, don't think that it's not about the kids. It's still about the kids. And this is something really important to remember. Another great strategy is to have a few strong examples ready beforehand. So a lot of interview questions are actually asking for the same things, just in different ways. So prepare. Have one strong classroom management example, have one differentiation example, one parent communication example, one lesson that you're super proud of. Maybe think of a math lesson, think of a literacy lesson, one challenge that you've overcome. You can reuse those stories in so many different ways, but as long as you have those core examples ready, you can reformat them to any question that comes up. And that is, again, coming from actually having to ask questions surrounding those examples. Now, let's go over some common interview questions and how to answer them. Again, this is coming from my experience, what has worked, what has not worked. Okay, so take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. Also, take bits and pieces and make it your own. So let's get into some actual questions. Question 1, which this is such a classic. Tell us about yourself. Love that, right? So this is almost always the first question they'll ask. And please do not just list out your resume. They've read your resume. Believe me. I've been on the other side. They've already read the resume. They have it in front of them. They're looking at it. They don't want that. This answer should sound conversational. Talk about your teaching background, your teaching philosophy, what excites you about education, what kind of classroom environment you want to create, why you want to be a teacher. For example, I'm just going to give you an example answer. I've always been passionate about creating engaging, supportive classrooms where students feel safe taking risks and learning independently. During my student teaching experience, I really discovered how much I love building classroom systems and helping students become confident learners. Now that sounds a lot stronger than, well, I graduated from Westchester University and I completed my student teaching in 2nd grade. Like, they know this. Question 2. A classic. How do you handle classroom management? And that's so broad, but it's a huge question and it gets asked a lot. And obviously, schools care about this a lot. They do not want to hear, well, I build relationships first. Relationships matter, but they also want structure, right? So your answer should include routines and examples of routines, expectations, examples of expectations and how you implement them, how you follow through on them, how you introduce them, how you model them. It should include conversation about consistency and how you stay consistent. Positive reinforcement, relationship building, of course, can be in there. Proactive management instead of reactive management. Maybe something like this. I believe strong classroom management starts with clear expectations and consistency. I explicitly teach routines at the beginning of the school year. I model expectations and I create a positive classroom community so that my kiddos know what success looks like. I also focus heavily on relationships because students obviously respond best when they feel respected and supported. That shows a balance between a plain and simple answer and what they want to hear. Question 3, how do you differentiate instruction? Again, so broad, right? So broad, but a really important question. And it comes up constantly. So you want to make sure you mention things like small groups, scaffolding, accommodations, multiple ways to access content, student choice, assessment data, and be specific. Again, mentioning all of these things is one thing, but having specific examples along the way is another. So remember, specific answers in an interview always sound stronger than vague educational buzzwords. Everyone knows the buzzwords. You don't need to say them. If you're going to say them, give real life examples and things that you have actually done. So here's an example question. What does student engagement look like in your classroom? And this is where you can talk about hands-on learning, collaboration, movement, discussion, student ownership, interactive lessons, especially in elementary classrooms. Schools want to hear that students are actively learning, not just sitting silently doing a worksheet for the entire day, okay? Here's another one. How do you communicate with parents? Here's another major one. They want to know, and give examples, of course, but they're really looking for, are you professional? Are you proactive instead of reactive? Can you handle difficult conversations? So you should mention things like regular communication, positivity, of course, partnership, and transparency. One thing I always think is important is don't make parent communication sound like it only happens when there's a problem. Talk about positive communication too, and how you want to regularly be in touch with the families in your classroom to build that relationship like we do with our students. All right. Now I want to talk about some questions that surprise people and some questions that might catch people off guard, because interviews are becoming much more scenario-based, I think. So you may hear things like, what would you do if a lesson completely flopped? What would you do if a student refused to do work? How would you handle conflict with a coworker? What would you do if a parent was upset with you? Describe a challenge that you have faced. And honestly, they're not looking for perfect answers. You should not have perfect answers, especially that goes for anyone, but especially if you're a new teacher. They're looking at your mindset more than your perfect answer. Do you stay calm? Are you reflective? Are you solution oriented? For example, if they ask about a failed lesson, right? Don't just say, I've never had one, or I can't think of one, because nobody believes that. Nobody. Instead, say something like, there have definitely been lessons that didn't go as planned. And when that happens, I like to reflect on what didn't work. I like to adjust my instruction and use it as a learning opportunity moving forward. That sounds mature. Now, demo lessons. Let's talk about them. They are the second most nerve-wracking thing. You got through the interview and now we have the demo. Now you're really showing off everything you just talked about, okay? And they can feel terrifying. A few quick demo lesson tips from my blog, and you can always go read more, again, at engagingearlylearners.com. But I wanted to give you some while we were chatting about it. So first, ask ahead of time what technology you're going to have. Are you going to have a smartboard, a whiteboard, a projector? Are you going to have manipulatives? Know what you're walking into. Second, keep students engaged as much as possible. Do not lecture them for the 30-minute demo lesson. They want to see interaction, questioning, engagement, movement, student thinking. Third, have clear expectations from the start, even though it's just a demo lesson, okay? Even though they're not your students. Show that you're setting expectations and that you follow through on them during the lesson. It's the perfect way to show how you would do that in a big classroom. And fourth, practice the timing. There were so many demo lessons I was sitting in where the person just did not have the timing straight. And it really bothers the admin because they want to see as much as they can in that little bit of time. So many demo lessons fall apart because the people try to cram too much in as well. Simple and well executed is a lot better than over ambitious and rushed, okay? And definitely have some kind of closure or exit ticket at the end to show that you can do the full circle of things, even though it's just a little bit of time. Okay. This part is important because sometimes people think interviews are all about having like the fanciest answers, right? But what are our admin actually looking for? And I kind of talked about this at the beginning of the episode. But honestly, this is what they're most looking for from what I have gathered. In an interview, they are most likely looking for positivity, flexibility, professionalism, collaboration, willingness to grow and learn. A huge thing schools want is someone that is coachable. They don't need or want someone that is perfect. They want someone that is coachable. Nobody expects, especially a new teacher, to know everything. But they do want someone who accepts feedback well, reflects, works with others, and communicates professionally. Also, they want to know and make sure that you genuinely like kids. And I know that that sounds obvious, but you can tell when someone is only focused on the curriculum and the standards and all of those things and not the students. The strongest candidates usually sound warm, reflective, organized, and most importantly, student-centered. Okay, another big part of interviews that people do not remember is that you can ask questions too. I always encourage people to ask questions on interviews. This is important. And I talked a lot in the last episode about, teachers aren't always in the right place. Sometimes we need to leave to find our best place, whatever. How will you know unless you ask those questions up front? And you won't know for sure, even if you ask all the questions. But you can wean out some places by asking questions from the start in your interview, even your first interview. At the end of most interviews, they will most likely ask, do you have any questions for us? Please do not say no. Have questions ready. Have them written down. Here are some good ones, okay? What support systems are in place for new teachers? Do I get a mentor? What does collaboration look like on your grade level teams? Do you do PLCs? Do you have grade level meetings? What qualities do successful teachers at this school have? What does mentoring look like here? What are your school-wide behavior expectations? Questions like that show professionalism and genuine interest. There's a lot more questions you can ask, but those are just a few. Now, before we end this episode, I want to say this, okay? Interviews are really hard. Even experienced teachers get nervous. If I had to go on an interview tomorrow, I would be so anxious I would probably not sleep. But remember, an interview is not about pretending to be perfect. It's about showing who you are as an educator, your passion, your mindset, your ability to connect with students. And honestly, sometimes the candidates who stand out the most are just the ones who sound authentic and prepared, but genuinely authentic. So practice your answers, research the school, prepare your examples, and trust yourself, because if you made it to the interview stage, they already saw something in you. Okay? So breathe. You got this. I also want to mention before I forget, I have an entire list of example interview questions that we used to use while doing interviews. So in my blog post that is linked below, if you go to it, there is a link directly to a full PDF of example interview questions. Definitely go check it out. Also, if you have access to my free resource library, which is also linked below, you can find interview questions under the folder interview questions. So definitely use those, but also any other ones that you think might be helpful. I just have this list from my experience. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode all about teacher interview tips and example questions. If this episode helped you, I would love if you shared it with a teacher friend, a student teacher, someone you know who's interviewing, or anyone currently job searching. And if you want even more interview tips and example questions, definitely check out the full blog post that is linked in the description down below. I hope that this episode helped you feel a little more prepared and a little less nervous. I hope you all have a fabulous day, and I will talk to you next time.